What up, though? Part 5. I don't think any segregation law angered black people in Montgomery more than bus segregation. Black people had boycotted Montgomery streetcars until the city council changed its ordinance so that nobody would be forced to give up a seat unless there was another seat to move to. But over the years, practices had changed, although the law had not. I was put off of the bus back in 1943. In 1945, 2 years after that incident, the state of Alabama passed a law requiring that all bus companies under its jurisdiction enforce segregation. But that law did not spell out what bus drivers were supposed to do in a case like mine. More of us rode the buses than Caucasians did because more whites could afford cars. It was very humiliating having to suffer the indignity of riding segregated buses twice a day, 5 days a week, to go downtown and work for white people. Now, mind you, they didn't have to go downtown and work for white people, and they didn't have to ride the buses. They chose to. Mr. Nixon used to try to negotiate some small changes. I know Mr. Nixon said that at some point he went to the bus company about black people having to pay at the front door and then go around to the back door to enter. They told him, "Your folks started it. They do it because they want to." Another time he went to see about extending the route of the Day Street bus. Black people in a little community on the other side of the Day Street Bridge had to walk across the bridge about half a mile to get to the bus. Mr. Nixon went down to the bus company to protest. The bus company told him that as long as the people were willing to walk the half mile and then pay to ride the rest of the way downtown, they had no need to extend the bus line. Joanne Robinson was an English professor at Alabama State College. Back in 1946, she had helped found the Women's Political Council. Over the years, she'd had her share of run-ins with the bus drivers. But at first, she couldn't get the other women in the council to get indignant. She had often brought protests to the bus company on behalf of the Women's Political Council. Finally, she managed to get the company to agree that the buses would stop at every corner in the black neighborhoods, just as they did in the white neighborhoods. But this was a very small victory. It was unfair to segregate us. The Montgomery NAACP was beginning to think about filing suit against the city of Montgomery over bus segregation, but they had to have the right plaintiff and a strong case. The best plaintiff would be a woman, because a woman would get more sympathy than a man. Joanne Robinson was an English professor at Alabama State College back in 1946. She had helped found the Women's Political Council. Over the years, she'd had her share of run-ins with the bus drivers, but at first, she couldn't get the other women in the council to get indignant. This is from Oxford English Dictionary. She couldn't get the other women in the council to be indignant. Indignant meaning affected with indignation, provoked to wrath by something regarded as unworthy, unjust, or ungrateful, moved by an emotion of anger mingled with scorn or contempt, inflamed at once with anger and disdain, said of persons their feelings, full of fierce fury and indignant hate, to him he turned. 1880, he published an indignant pamphlet on the subject of his wrongs. So, Joanne Robinson couldn't get the other women in the council to get indignant. She couldn't get them, she couldn't provoke wrath in them, and anger and disdain. I guess it wasn't as important to them. The Montgomery NAACP was beginning to think about filing suit against the city of Montgomery over bus segregation, but they had to have the right plaintiff and a strong case. The best plaintiff would be a woman, because a woman would get more sympathy than a man. And the woman would have to be above reproach, have a good reputation, and have done nothing wrong but refuse to give up her seat. Back in the spring of 1955, a teenage girl named Claudette Colvin and an elderly woman refused to give up their seats in the middle section of a bus to white people. When the driver went to get the police, the elderly woman got off the bus, but Claudette refused to leave, saying she had already paid her dime and had no reason to move. When the police came, they dragged her from the bus and arrested her. Now, her name was familiar to me, and it turned out that Claudette Colvin was the great-granddaughter of Mr. Gus Vaughn, the unmixed black man with all the children back in Pine Level who refused to work for a white man. His great-granddaughter must have inherited his sense of pride. I took a particular interest in the girl and her cause. I did meet with Claudette, along with Mr. Nixon and Joanne Robinson, and talked about taking her case to the federal courts. Everything was going along fine until Mr. Nixon discovered that Claudette was pregnant. She wasn't married, and so that was the end of that case. If the white press got hold of that information, they would have a field day. So the decision was made to wait until we had a plaintiff who was more upstanding before we went ahead and invested any more time and effort and money. Another bus incident involving a woman occurred. Her name was Louise Smith, and she was about 18 years old. They say she paid her fine and didn't protest. Hers certainly wasn't a good case for Mr. Nixon to appeal to a higher court. I knew they needed a plaintiff who was beyond reproach, because I was in on the discussions about the possible court cases. But that is not why I refused to give up my bus seat to a white man on Thursday, December 1st, 1955. I did not intend to get arrested. If I had been paying attention, I wouldn't even have gotten on that bus. When I got off from work that evening of December 1st, I went to Court Square as usual to catch the Cleveland Avenue bus home. I didn't look to see who was driving when I got on, and by the time I recognized him, I had already paid my fare. It was the same driver who had put me off the bus back in 1943, 12 years earlier. I saw a vacant seat in the middle section of the bus and took it. The next stop, some whites got on. They filled up the white seats, and one man was left standing. The driver looked back and noticed the man standing. Then he looked back at us. He said, "Let me have those front seats," because they were the front seats of the black section. Didn't anybody move. We just sat right where we were, the four of us. Then he spoke a second time. "Y'all better make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats." The man in the window seat next to me stood up, and I moved to let him pass by me. And then I looked across the aisle and saw that the two women were also standing. I moved over to the window seat. I could not see how standing up was going to make it light for me. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. Rosa Parks was tired. Her feet hurt. I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people have an image of me as being old then. I was 42. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. The driver of the bus saw me still sitting there, and he asked, was I going to stand up? I said, no. He said, well, I'm going to have you arrested. Then I said, you may do that. These were the only words we said to each other. He got out of the bus and stayed outside for a few minutes waiting for the police. People have asked me if it occurred to me that then, that I could be the test case the NAACP had been looking for. I did not think about that at all. If I had let myself think too deeply about what might happen to me, I might have gotten off the bus, but I chose to remain. It would have been quite interesting if the other three had stayed where they were, because if they'd had to arrest four of us instead of one, then that would have given me a little support. Eventually, two policemen came. They got on the bus, and one of them asked me why I didn't stand up. I asked him, "Why do you all push us around?" He said to me, and I quote him exactly, "I don't know, but the law is the law, and you're under arrest." One policeman picked up my purse, and the second one picked up my shopping bag and escorted me to the squad car. In the squad car, they returned my personal belongings to me. They did not put their hands on me or force me into the car. The driver would finish his route and then come straight back to swear out the warrant. I was only in custody, not legally arrested, until the warrant was signed. They didn't search me or handcuff me. A white matron came to escort me to my jail cell. She placed me in an empty, dark cell and slammed the door closed. She walked a few steps away, but then she turned around and came back. She said, "There are two girls around the other side, and if you want to go over there with them instead of being in a cell by yourself, I will take you over there." I told her that it didn't matter, but she said, "Let's go around there, and then you won't have to be in a cell alone." There were two black women in the cell that the matron took me to. The one who spoke to me asked me what had happened to me. I became interested in her story and wondered how I could assist her. She said she had been there for 55 or 57 days and that she was a widow. Her husband had died. She'd been keeping company with another man, and he got angry with her and struck her. She took a hatchet and went after him. He had her arrested. After she'd been in jail for a certain length of time, the man had kind of healed up and he wanted to get her out of jail. I called home. My husband and mother were both there. See if Parks will come down here and get me out. He said, I'll be there in a few minutes. A friend came by in his car. He'd heard about me being in jail and had driven to our place on Cleveland Court to see if he could help. He said he'd drive Parks to the jail. As Parks' friend had indicated, the word was already out about my arrest. Mr. Nixon had been notified by his wife, who was told by a neighbor, Bertha Butler, who had seen me escorted off the bus. News traveling fast. Mr. Nixon called the jail to find out what the charge was. Then he had tried to reach Fred Gray, one of the two black lawyers in Montgomery, but he wasn't home. So finally, Mr. Nixon called Clifford Durr, the white lawyer who was Miss Virginia Durr's husband. Mr. Durr called the jail and found out that I'd been arrested under the segregation laws. He also found out what the bail was. Parks had called a white man he knew who could raise the bail. His friend took him over to the man's house to pick him up. The matron came to let me know that I was being released. We went to the desk where I picked up my personal belongings and was given a trial date. Mr. Nixon asked that the date be the following Monday, December 5th, 1955, explaining that he was a Pullman porter and would be out of Montgomery until then. I didn't realize how much being in jail had upset me until I got out. Mr. Nixon asked if I would be willing to make my case a test case against segregation. Parks and my mother supported the idea. I agreed to be the plaintiff. Mr. Nixon was happy as could be when I told him yes. He said, "My God, look what segregation has put in my hands." I was a perfect plaintiff. He would tell reporters she was secretary for everything I had going. She was honest, she was clean, she had integrity. The press couldn't go out and dig up something she did last year or last month or 5 years ago. No police record. I'd worked all my life. I wasn't pregnant with an illegitimate child. Early that Friday morning, Mr. Nixon called the Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, minister of the First Baptist Church. Mr. Nixon had decided that black ministers could do more to mobilize support in the community than anyone else. Then he called a white reporter for the Montgomery Advertiser named Joel Asbell and arranged a meeting down at Union Station to show him one of the handbills. Mr. Nixon wanted the story on the front page. Most black people had finally had enough of segregation on the buses. They stayed off those buses. As a result, the Montgomery City buses were practically empty. Oh, a few black people took the buses. Those few who didn't want to be inconvenienced. When the bus they were on passed the bus stop full of black people waiting for cabs, they ducked down low so nobody would see them. Why? Because the so-called black people were going to ridicule them because they made a different choice. Now, why would they do that? The prosecution also called a witness, a white woman who testified that there had been a vacant seat in the back of the bus and that I had refused to take it. Professor J.E. Pierce, who had served with me on the NAACP Defense Committee for Andy Wright, was very upset about the woman's statement. He told Mr. Nixon, "You can always find some damn white woman to lie." He's assuming she lied. Reverend Abernathy decided to form the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA. Mr. Nixon was there. They wanted to form a brand new organization. Was that they thought it would be better than just leaving the organizing to an established group like the NAACP. The NAACP was a relatively weak organization in Alabama. They decided they should elect a president, and they elected the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. At the time, I didn't know Dr. King. I found out later that I knew his wife, Coretta. I did not know her well, but I had been to concerts where she sang. Dr. King was new to Montgomery, and Dr. Abernathy had been trying to get him active in civil rights work. Rufus Lewis attended Dexter Ave Baptist Church and had a very good opinion of Dr. King. Rufus Lewis had an exclusive nightclub. Only registered voters could go there. It was Rufus Lewis who nominated Dr. King to be president of the MIA. Some of the biggest names in the African American community were not registered to vote. There was a man named R.R. Pierce from Lowndes County who was the principal of the school there. Nobody ever did get him to try to register. Dr. King was introduced to the audience as the president of the new Montgomery Improvement Association. He was a fine speaker, and he gave a speech that really got the crowd excited. This is part of what he said. There comes a time that people get tired of being segregated. We have sometimes given our white brothers the feeling that we like the way we are being treated. There lived a great people, a black people, who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization. This is from Eyes on the Prize, page 76. Reverend Ralph Abernathy read the list of demands that the Montgomery Improvement Association was going to present to the bus company and the city's white leaders. There were 3 demands. Number 1, courteous treatment on the buses. Number 2, first come, first served seating with whites in front and blacks in back. Number 3, hiring of black drivers for the black bus routes. Again, Reverend Ralph Abernathy read the list of demands that the Montgomery Improvement Association was going to present to the bus company and the city's white leaders. There were 3 demands. Number 1, courteous treatment on the buses. Number 2, first come, first served seating with whites in front and blacks in back. Number 3, hiring of black drivers for the black bus routes. Affirmative action. Number 3 sounds like affirmative action. DEI. The crowd was cheering, yes. do the right thing,